Greetings everyone, and welcome to my hopefully short video on how to bias the Fender 65 Super Reverb Reissue. And the reason I'm making this video is, well, I have a used 65 Reissue and I need to bias it, and I couldn't find a single video on YouTube that told me how to do it. So I figured I'd make one, and since I'm going to make one, I wouldn't mind telling you a little bit about the backstory of this amp and why I feel I need to do such things. I don't know when you're watching this, but today, from where I'm sitting and with what's going on, used equipment, even new equipment, it's getting difficult to find. And used equipment is really becoming outrageously expensive. I mean, just absolutely outrageously expensive. So I've really wanted a Super Reverb for a long time, because the Super Reverb is perfect for that sort of, you know, spaghetti western, Ghost Riders in the Sky kind of music, and I want to play that when my cats fight, you know, some gunslinger music. So I wanted a Super Reverb. So I found a used one being sold at a guitar center, you know, 500 miles away. So I called that guitar center. I'll give you a little bit of the story. So I called that guitar center, and I get someone in guitars, and I'm like, hey, I'm interested in your used Super Reverb, because it was for a good price. You know, I was surprised. And I was like, so, you know, can you tell me a little bit about it? Well, no. I don't know anything about it. Well, what if you went and physically looked at it? Then could you tell me some things about it? Well, maybe. And I just had like some real basic questions like, I don't know, does it have its original parts? Does everything work? Don't know. Didn't know anything, couldn't tell me anything other than, you know, if you don't like it, you've got 45 days to return it. So I figured I would take a chance, and I had it sent to me, and I plugged it in, and it just sounded like ass. Sounded absolutely terrible. And I said, okay, sounds terrible. I mean, it was just shipped around. So there's this little back panel you can pull. Where is it? Right here. Got this. Yeah, it's just got a couple screws that hold it in. You can pull this little back panel, and now you have access to the vacuum tubes, and you can look at them. And I can see that one of the power tubes is missing. It's got two 6L6s in this, two power tubes to get it its 45 watts, and one of them isn't there. And it wasn't in the packaging, it wasn't in the amp, it's not like it fell out. One of the power tubes wasn't in there. And some people think that, and erroneously, that if you pull a power tube, that, oh, well, you know, you can cut the power in half and then it's not so loud. And that can be true if the vacuum tubes are working, you know, kind of in series with one another to you know, to generate that amperage. But this is sort of a push-pull kind of thing. You know, there's a phase inverter, and each power tube is, you know, pushing on one half of that transformer. I'm probably saying it wrong, but I mean, that's how I envision it in my mind. So, pulling one of the power tubes would, I mean, quite possibly, you know, just wreck the output transformer. So I ordered all new tubes for it, which have arrived in the mail, and now I'm gonna put all that in, and I'm gonna rebias this particular amp. And since I kind of want to have a look at the output transformer to make sure nothing bad's happened, I'm going to pull this. I'm going to pull its the amp out of its housing. I'm just going to take that amp chassis out. I don't know if you would necessarily need to do that to bias this amp, because, like I said, there's nothing about it on YouTube. So I'm just going to do it anyways. And to get us started on that, I will tell you a few things I'm going to need to do that I'm not going to bother to sit there and film and talk about. But, you know, to pull the chassis out, I'm going to turn this thing on its side. There are 4 screws on top of this box that hold the chassis in. It makes sense to turn the amp on its side. so that when I loosen the screws, it just doesn't fall out to the bottom. So I'm going to pull this chassis out, and that'll give me an opportunity to have a look at the output transformer and you know, and check its windings with a multimeter, just to make sure that nothing bad has happened with that. So you're right now you're probably looking at images of that here in the future. And then when I'm done with that, I'm going to get to how to bias this thing, and how to, even how to deal with it if you can't adjust it to where you want. There are some resistors that can be played with within this amp. I have downloaded its schematic, so I kind of theoretically know where everything is. Now it's just a question of how do you best get to it, and how do you do what you do. So I'm going to get busy. Well, as with all things, we've had a bit of a delay. While I was working to get the amplifier out of its chassis, I figured, well, you know what, I ought to just pull the whole speaker baffle thing off, and have a look at the speakers, vacuum them out. And while doing so, I really had a good look at the wiring harness, and it was a complete and absolute disaster. It looked like someone had gone in there and maybe wanted to run this at 4 ohms. And I should mention, the Super Reverb runs at 2 ohms. I know that's a pretty heavy load, but believe it or not, that's how it runs. It's 4 8-ohm speakers running in parallel, and that gives you 2 ohms. It's a 2 ohm load. So it looked like someone had gone in there and maybe tried to wire it differently, and but they didn't know what they were doing, and it was a complete disaster. So I'm thinking, you know what, I can just wire up new harnesses. And besides, I really want to replace this cheap plastic Fender plug, and I don't know if this was the original. It's cheap and plastic, and that's what everything was running off of. I actually have replacement Fender all metal housing, a much smaller profile 1/4-inch plug that I'm going to use, and it's not that hard. I've got some nice 18 gauge wire, nice and flexible, modern. The wiring I pulled off, it just kind of brittle. Maybe it's 22 gauge and brittle. It's just easier to just solder up a whole new wiring harness. And besides, I've got these, what do they call them, like speaker lug connectors. I got a box of these off of Amazon for, a couple of dollars. It's not that expensive, and I can create a nice quality wiring harness. And I'm going to add a little bit of length to this plug anyways, so if I ever want to use my 2 notes Captor X, like if I want to really run that thing hot and have a power soak or something like that, that I'm able to do that. I can just, unplug this and just plug it, give it a little bit of length. So that's where we're at the moment. We had a bit of a delay, and I don't know, maybe the next time you see me, I'll have a full beard or something, because it seems like now I'm going to be chasing my tail for a little bit, doing some stuff. We'll see. Greetings again, everybody. It's been several days since I last appeared on the video here, and that's because, well, for one, we got an ice storm, and we didn't have power for a while, so that slowed me down. The other thing that really slowed me down was getting this chassis out of its case, and the reason for that is, remember when I told you just needed to remove those 4 bolts, and this thing would just fall out? Because, I saw that on YouTube. I saw people doing exactly that. But I didn't see them doing exactly that to the Reissue. And the Reissue has, the chassis, where the bolt goes through, it's threaded. But they also had an additional little locking bolt on there. And it's not on there very tight. And you should definitely remove it, because otherwise you're going to do what I did, which was snap all 4 bolts. I snapped all of them with my Herculean strength. They just all snapped off. I've been able to get 3 of them out. I have one that's still stuck. I'm probably just going to have to Dremel it out. These bolts aren't expensive. I've already ordered new ones. They should appear here in a day or so. But, you know, what you need is kind of a deep well, a socket, 9mm. Just takes that bolt out. They come out real easy. And then after that, you can unscrew and remove the chassis if for whatever reason you need to remove the chassis. And that caused quite a bit of difficulty for me. Apart from that, I have retubed the entire unit. I gotta say, when I pulled the old vacuum tubes out, you know, clearly whoever delivered this to Guitar Center just stuck whatever tubes they had laying around in there. They were different brands. Some weren't labeled at all. One of them just had a sticker with a question mark on it. So good job, Guitar Center. Glad to see that you're looking out for your customers. Thank you. Thank you. Couple interesting things I did learn by pulling this thing apart. I really like the fact that that the filter caps are right here. You know, on top of the amp. You wouldn't have to remove. You wouldn't have to remove the, you know, this chassis to get to it. You could just pull that out and recap it. It's under a little shielded case here. I kind of like that. So I like the fact that if I ever do need to recap it, it'll be an easy thing to do. The other thing I learned is if you want to do the bias, which we're going to be talking about here in just a moment, there is a pathway here between these 2 transformers. I'm sure at this point I'm showing you a close-up photo. You can just stick a standard screwdriver in it. You'll see it's everything in there is plastic, and you just turn that, and that's how you will set the bias. I did want to pull this just to make sure, because like I said, I hadn't seen anything online. I wanted to double check that, you know, that wasn't maybe some place that you would check for a voltage or some other, you know, access point that shoving a screwdriver in there would, you know, just cause a bunch of harm. But nope, that's where the bias is done. So that's a pretty easy thing. You can see here, to do my bias, I have a bias meter that I picked up on Amazon. It was $75. It would allow me to do 4 of these power tubes at once, which is great. I can also purchase different different plugs for, you know, maybe the like EL84s or 6V6s, so I could test them. I think it's worth it. The first time you have to pay someone to bias your amp, I mean, you know, you'll get your money back for that. I'll be able to use this just again and again and again and again. And it's so much easier than, you know, trying to stick probes into this thing while it's running. I don't have to worry about any of that. I just plug this into the socket and then just plug the power tube into this. So you see both of those sitting there, feeding into the readout down there. I also learned, you know, really just by sort of working out the math, what the where the high and the low numbers are for the bias on this. And I'll try to explain it as best as I can. But, you know, when you order your tubes, or if you're just curious, you can just go online. It's not hard. You can find a data sheet for these vacuum tubes. There's a lot of information in the data sheet. All kinds of numbers and values and capacitances and voltages and things that you can do with it. What you really want to know for what we're talking about today is you want to know the wattage that the plates can dissipate. Really, that decides how hot you can run these, how much wattage is going to go to your speakers, and what the limits are. And for this particular vacuum tube, the plate in its sort of maximum setting can dissipate 30 watts of power. That's, if you run this thing at 100%, you can dissipate 30 watts of power. Of course, you'll also cook your tubes relatively quickly. And by quickly, I mean, you could cook them in days. Typically, the recommendation is really to not run these, any hotter than 70%. And 70% of 30 watts is 21 watts. So really, I don't want to dissipate any more than, 21 watts of power out of that. So how do I get, the numbers that I'm looking for? Well, you can go online and go to an Ohm's Law calculator. And as long as you know two of the numbers, because really when you're dealing with Ohm's Law, it's just a pie, and you can have pieces, but if you make one piece bigger, other pieces naturally get made smaller. Just Ohm's Law. It's just really ratios. And as long as you know two of the numbers, you can figure out how many milliamps that you want this thing to be drawing. And the easiest way for me was, well, I looked at the schematic for this, and the schematic tells me what the voltage is that's going to the plates of these power tubes. And if I know the plate voltage, and I know the wattage, then I can just plug those two numbers in and get my milliamps, for my bias. So for example, if I want to run this at 70%, that's 21 watts, I would set the bias at 47 milliamps. If I wanted to run it at 60%, that's 18 watts, I would set the bias for 40 milliamps. If I wanted to run it really cold, which is at 50%, and that's where sort of the recommendations come, 50, somewhere between 50 and 70% is where you want to have it. And, the hotter you have it, if you're running it at 70%, well, I mean, it's going to break up quicker and all that fun stuff. So if you want it just super ultra clean, yeah, you might run it at 50%, which is at 15 watts, which is 34 milliamps. So to do that, like I said, I plug the sockets in. There they are. Those are running to it. I have speakers plugged in, so I have a load. You've got to keep, I disappeared for a second. You've got to keep a load on the output transformer, or you can cause harm. I've got my screwdriver. I will be out of the picture for a second while I make this adjustment. So let's say I want to run this at 60%, which is 40 milliamps, right? I'm here at 41, so maybe I'll back that off a little bit. I gotta say, when I first powered it up and checked it, whoever had this before was running it at 30, which was even below 50%. So that might explain why it sounded terrible. So here we are at 40. Let's check the other, the tube. I can check 4 of these, and I can see my other ones running hotter. And you might be saying, well, why is that? And I'm going to bring it down a little bit, and I'm going to have to kind of split the difference. Maybe run this guy at, and I also should mention, when you make your adjustments, it takes a second or two for the whole thing to sort of settle in. Now you might be saying, how come these things aren't matched? Why aren't these things just matched? And they actually are matched. When you go to purchase your your power tubes, you'll often notice that there's a, like an area where you can check in or say, hey, I want to buy matched pairs. And then the seller who's already done this, they've already done a process where they've tried to match these as closely as possible. But even matched as closely as possible in a situation where you're looking at like a 10% tolerance. So even though those two numbers don't necessarily agree, it's still more or less a matched set of vacuum tubes. And you also might be saying, well, how come I can't just adjust each one individually? And this particular amp doesn't allow that. They refer to this as a fixed bias amp. I can turn everything up and down, but I can't turn them up and down individually. And I think that's well within tolerance. When you think about these amplifiers, I mean, the pots typically, 10-20% tolerance. A 20% tolerance on the capacitors is perfectly normal. So, I mean, that's just sort of how these things work. So even though it looks like everything is wildly off, I'm actually perfectly fine. So a quick review. What you need to know when you want to set this is you definitely want to know how many watts that the plate can dissipate. You want to know that, and then you want to decide, well, do I want to run it at 50, 60, 70, or something in between, and then you can get that wattage. Again, 50% of 30 watts is 15 watts. It's pretty simple math. Other than that, you need a plate voltage. The plate voltage for mine, the schematic said it was 433. I measured it at 443. That's not something you should get too excited about. These transformers are just dumb devices. A voltage comes in, it gets multiplied through the windings, and a voltage comes out. So here in the United States, you could plug in somewhere, your voltage could be 115 volts coming out of the wall. I measure here, I'm running a little hot. I'm running at about 123 volts coming out of my wall, which would explain why my B plus is a little bit hotter than what the schematic says it should be. And you can test that. Matter of fact, you can test it right. You don't even have to take the cap off. The B plus going to the plates is right here where the filter caps are. I can measure it right there. I also measured it on the lug to the tube itself, just to double check those numbers. So like I said, if you have the wattage you want, and you have a voltage, Ohm's law then will give you the rest of what you need.
Oh, wow. One of the things I forgot to mention was, if you kind of want to run this hot, and for whatever reason you've run out of play while trying to do the bias, you've turned that pot all the way in one direction, and you still can't get it, past maybe 40 or 42 or whatever. The solution to that is to lower the value of resistor R59. And R59 is a really easy resistor to get to. The secret to that is you don't want to pull that resistor out. You want to tack another resistor on top of it, basically, so that, both resistors just sort of run in parallel. And I have a little drawing here that you can look at. You just want to tie one leg of the resistor to one side and the other leg of the resistor to the other side. So, that signal's going through, both resistors at the same time. And resistors in parallel lower the value. And I did some math, and it seems to me that The best value for this would be an 82K, in other words, 82,000 ohm, half-watt resistor. Just a carbon composition, carbon comp, half-watt, 82K, and that will lower the value of our 59 from 27,000 down to about 21,000 ohms, and that will give you the play you need to run the unit hotter. So, I guess in conclusion, I will most certainly remember to leave a link for this in the description. This is a great little box. You'd be able to do an amplifier with up to 4 power tubes. And I should mention, some of the other amplifiers, they'll have, you'll be able to adjust these in pairs. So instead of just one adjustment area, you'll have 2, like with a Marshall. So you'll be able to adjust these in pairs and work to get them as closely as possible. So I'm pretty excited about that. I guess the next time you see me, I'll have this all put back together, and maybe I'll play us a little bit of a tune. Oh, one other thing I should mention. By the way, this little Mojotone, and I just got this. Matter of fact, for this project, to hold a chassis, this thing has been great. I can adjust it. To tilt it at an angle. If this chassis were shorter, these areas here move in and out. It makes things pretty simple. So I'm going to sign off for now. The next time you see me, I will embarrass myself by playing something. So that's it. That's how you bias a Fender 65 Super Reverb Reissue.